Hey everyone, and welcome back to Creative Futures, Place and Presence. I hope you all had a really nice comfort break. I understand how important those things are with so much work and events being delivered digitally and I suppose, wonders of screen fatigue. I'm Will Taylor, and I'm your host for today. We are all asking our guests and hosts and panels to our panel chairs, to give audio descriptions for themselves in order to ensure that all of our viewers and participants can get as full experience as possible. So for anyone who's watching all day, I think you'll get to witness a journey of me getting to know myself very well, as I'll be audio describing myself every time I come on the screen. So I am a black male in his early 30s, wearing a soft pink satin do-rag, some black overhead headphones, black rimmed glasses. I have a short black beard, and I'm wearing a black shirt with a gold necklace. I'm joined by our two BSL interpreters. First up, we have Rachel Jones. Rachel's pronouns are she, her. She's a mixed race woman in her early 30s and is wearing a black t-shirt. Her hair is red and tied up, and she is sitting in front of a white wall at home. We also have with us Emily Quigley, a British Sign Language interpreter. Emily's pronouns are she, her. She is a white woman in her early 30s, wearing a black t-shirt. Her hair is brown and curly, and she's wearing black framed glasses. And she is sitting at her desk in a light blue with a light blue wall behind her. So I'd like to say thanks to John and Claire for setting such a wonderful scene. As you heard, there's so much work that's been happening in the background, and so many difficult questions have been asked of ourselves, those who are involved in the program directly and those who are part of the community around the research in the program, about why we're doing this work and how we can continue to do it and ensure that it stays progressive, generative, and serves our community at large. So next up on the main stage, we have a panel, weaving narrative and technology. Which comes first? You'll also be able to see sort of the research from this expanded performance process and collaborative practice on the expo stage. And I'd like to invite the chair for the next panel, Rachel Briscoe, to the stage. Rachel does a lot of work in weaving narrative and technology together. So you are in the best hands we could find to lead a conversation like this. And I'll hand over to Rachel.
Thank you so much, Will. Hello, and welcome to the first panel of today. So my name is Rachelriscoe. I am a white woman in my 30s with short blonde hair, which is desperately in need of a cut. I'm wearing a black jumper, and in the room behind me, you can see some bookshelves and other shelves with junk on them. My pronouns are she, her. In my life, when I'm not chairing panels, I co-run a digital story studio called Fast Familiar. We make all kinds of audience-centric experiences, and we're fascinated by how using technology in those experiences can help people connect with each other in different ways and make new kinds of meaning. So I am very much looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes talking to this group of incredibly fascinating and interesting people about this interplay between narrative and technology. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, give a little bit of background on their practice, so what they do, and then also talk a bit about what interests them about this theme the interplay between narrative and technology. So Tenuja, can we come to you first? Wow, as if by magic, Tanuja appears. Everybody appears.
Hi, thanks, Rachel, and hi, everyone. So I'm Tanuja. I am a brown woman in my mid-40s. I have got long black hair. It's tied up at the moment. Overhead headphones. I'm wearing a black sleeveless top. There are bookshelves behind me, and I'm wearing red-rimmed glasses and pink lipstick. So I am a director, a dramaturg. I'm occasionally a writer, occasionally a sound designer. I work across theatre, screen, digital audio, and other forms. And more recently, I've been venturing into narrative video games and VR. I'm also co-artistic director of Sleep Dogs, which is a curiosity-led collaboration with a writer and composer, Tim X Atack, and again, working across multiple different forms. So at heart, really, as an artist, my aim is to make work that connects with people, by which I mean work that invites people to think things and feel stuff. And within that, I'm interested in digital technologies as aesthetic and emotional textures. And for the last year, I've been an industry fellow on the Expanded Performance Pathfinder. And I found that my research has kept returning to a focus on emotional immersion, which I would say is a shorthand for the private, personal, hard to measure, but deeply impactful sense of involvement that keeps us watching or listening or playing or searching, questioning, caring. So basically, it's what moves us. It's what gets under our skin. And in terms of this panel, well, story is at the heart of my practice. I work mostly with scripted fiction. I love genre storytelling, so I work a lot with sci-fi, speculative fiction, supernatural stories. And I'm about to start rehearsing a theatre show, which is essentially a rom-com set during a party at the end of as the end of the world approaches. And as a director, I think about my role as composing and constructing how the audience experiences the story. So whatever form I'm working in, I like to think about story as an experiential encounter, something that feels alive for the audience in the moment that they encounter it, even if it's a pre-recorded broadcast. And I use the word story when I'm making stuff, even if I'm not working with an identifiable narrative, because for me, what that does is it keeps me focused on how the audience are making meaning at every point during the duration of the work. So I'm interested in story. It's there right through my practice. And I'm interested in technology as part of the material that I work with. So in the same way as I might work with bodies or voice or light or sound, I think about those in the same way as part of my kind of storytelling materials. So yeah, that's me.
Oh, thank you so much, Tanuja. There's so much in there that I'm sure we're going to come back and delve into a little bit more. Harry, could we come to you next?
Hi, I'm Harry, he, him, they, them. I am a cis white male in my late 20s, short hair and light stubble. I'm wearing a blue-ish top with a blue curtain in the background with some spring sunlight poking through. I am a producer working across XR and film. My creative projects have always been around LGBTQ identity politics and to better understand the use of new technologies to create immersive experiences kind of beyond the affordances of film. As part of, I'm a new talent fellow as part of the Bristol and Bath Creative R&D Expanded Performance Fellowship. And yes, so the questions that I put forward to the fellowship is in regards to digital techniques such as motion and volumetric capture in the framework of dance XR, and how to encourage self-identity and provide and to provide safe passage to LGBTQ immersions, particularly in the context of live social VR spaces. And today I published a paper as part of my fellowship, which acts as a kind of baseline for dance XR creators, which more than anything highlights a process over an outcome. And in terms of this panel, I'm particularly interested in understanding the different ways to co-create XR of our collaborators. And because I think there's quite a few unsaid conversations that aren't happening as to why we're using technology in the first place in our stories. And I think we need to start to think about why we're using technology and what kind of conversations we need to begin to start having to ensure the digital safety of our audiences and our collaborators that puts people over technology and narrative.
Thank you so much, Harry. And can we come to you, Paul?
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Paul Clarke. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a middle-aged white man with a beard. And now it has to be said, pretty long hair. It was very short at the start of lockdown, but now it comes pretty much down to my chin. So it measures the length of lockdown. I'm wearing a blue top, and there's a black wall behind me. I teach performance studies at University of Bristol, and I'm also one of the artistic directors of the company Uninvited Guests. We've been going for a pretty long time now here in Bristol, over 20 years old, and we make performance, but that performance often involves technologies. And we've also made installations, theatrical guided tours, and visitor experiences. So why am I here? Well, I'm here because I'm one of the digital placemaking fellows. And as part of that fellowship, I made Future Places Toolkit in collaboration with Jess from Uninvited Guests, the creative technologists Fenizi and Duncan Speakman. And Future Places Toolkit is an augmented reality engagement activity for neighbourhood visioning and for planning consultation. And you can watch a video demo of that in the expo throughout today. So fairly unsurprisingly, as a placemaking fellow, I'm really interested in location-based technologies and performance, the way the city and walking through it can be a kind of interface. And I'm also interested in ways that technologies can enable interaction and participation. When I first saw the subject of this panel around narrative and technology and which comes first, I thought, well, what I should be saying is that the stories should come first and the technologies you use should always emerge out of those. That would be my conventional advice, probably the advice I'd give to my students. But I'd like to say that for us, rather than narrative coming first, it would be the place and the people or community that comes first or is at the center of the work. So yeah, that's an introduction to my interest.
Thanks so much, Paul. And I should also say that we were going to be joined today by Manu Maunganidze. Unfortunately, he can't be with us, but you can still check out some of his work in the expo, and I would really recommend that you do that. For people at home, please do use the chat yourselves. Please ask questions, respond, comment, post links. I feel like the amazing expertise on this panel is probably reflected in the people listening at home. So please do contribute. Yes, so let's get started. Tanuja, I have a question for you. So you've spoken about technology, I guess, as a collaborator, as sort of part of the process that makes offers. And I just wondered if you could speak a bit more about that, and I guess how it affects the process of making art. So how do you think a room where that technological collaborator is present, how is that different to where they aren't present?
So yes, I like to think about technology as a collaborator, and I sort of say that in order to kind of try and get away from the convention of technology as something that problem solves for you, that has a kind of practical and functional aspect that is not necessarily also something that can hold meaning and an aesthetic encounter. And as you say, that whole notion of collaboration as something, as a process where different things make offers into the kind of the creative space. So in the same way as people will make offers into that creative space, I think it's really important to think about all those elements, whether it's kind of light or sound or the space you're in, and of course in the technology that you use, as something that's kind of making offers into the space that you can use as a kind of generative thing, as opposed to necessarily something that just kind of fixes things down. And in terms of then how that impacts on process, like any collaboration, it kind of extends, it sometimes makes things more complicated, it sometimes makes things take longer. But it also, of course, offers kind of different perspective, different lenses, different kind of ways of considering the material, or different perspectives on the material. So I think in this, I would say that as as an artist, I have and as the reason I think of myself as a director is I make decisions. That's really basically what I do, and so I don't know how much it. I guess I don't know how much it really changes anything in the kind of notion of art making for me. But I think what it does is it's further layers. As someone who comes out of theatre making, the conventions of theatre making are often kind of very rigid. The sort of traditional theatre making is like, you prioritize the actors, and then you kind of, for some reason, only bring in like the technology like at the last minute, which just I've never understood. And so, part of the process that I've been developing is kind of ways to just free up, I guess, the kind of the dialogue between elements, so that we can kind of really feel what these different elements bring to the space, and kind of make some of those decisions based on like how all these things feel together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And coming to you, Paul, for you, it's not, in a lot of the work that you make with uninvited guests, it's not just a dialogue between narrative and technology. It's also a dialogue with an audience, because the audience is really central to what you're making. So we chose like Love Letters at Home, which I was lucky enough to experience in lockdown 1. It's the audience's sort of content, to use that horrible word, that is the body of the experience. So I guess you have these 3 elements. You have the audience, the story or theme, and then you've got the technology that's sort of making it possible. And so what's the interplay between those 3 elements when you're developing a show?
Yeah, I really like what Tanuja's saying about the technology as a collaborator or a material, and collaborating with that material, with the technologies early on in the process. I suppose with uninvited guests, we tend to, generally, we probably begin with a concept, or a theme or a purpose, what we want the work to do in the world, perhaps. And that might lead us to some technology, or it might not. But yeah, as I said when I was introducing myself, I'd like to think of our pieces, as you're saying, as audience-centered, that the participants come first, and we try to come up with structures for their narratives, for their stories, structures to hold their stories, if you like. And in the case of Future Places Toolkit, the function of the technology, the AR, the live AR illustrations, is to inspire people to co-create sci-fi stories for their place. But often, as you're saying, with our shows, we don't really have any content at all. No content until the audience start to make their contributions. And sometimes with our digital, for instance, with our digital time capsule show to those born later, that's not until the show starts and people make their contributions there and then using their mobile devices. Rather than people's mobiles being a distraction in that show, they allow them to be part of the show and to interact live. It's good to hear you got to experience Love Letters at Home. That was our response to lockdown and to theatres closing, when lots of people were making video recordings of live shows available, and we wanted to make something that felt live, that would help people feel a bit socially closer when we were physically distant, to give us a space in which to connect. And as you said, that was a Zoom version of a live performance that had been performed in the same space and time as the audience. And in fact, the live version, in the live version of the show, the audience sat around a table with us. We drank kava together, and it was quite like a wedding or a wake. With that piece, the audience were invited to send in song requests and dedications to people they love or care about, and we read them on their behalf in the show. So the script was different every night, and it's co-authored with its audience. The live show was very much about being present with one another and listening to or witnessing each other's stories of love for partners, for friends, and for family. But we were really surprised about the online version, the Zoom version. If anything, I think, well, and you could tell us about your experience, but if anything, I think we found that it became more intimate with us broadcasting live from our bedrooms to your domestic spaces. You got to see the performers in their homes. You even encountered their real families. And when you were hearing a dedication, you could scroll through the images on Zoom and see people dancing to their request, shedding a tear perhaps, or raising a glass to the person they dedicated to. So we were surprised really with translating that live performance online, how intimate it became in close-up over Zoom.
Yeah, it really did, and I haven't experienced the live version, but it felt almost sort of distilled, like the essence of the show felt, yeah, I suppose very powerful in that time when we were all separated from a lot of the people who we care about. Yeah, okay, interesting. So coming to you, Harry, I'm kind of interested in this, in the idea of what stories live or get told in what spaces. And I know a lot of your work has been in exploring social VR, so virtual reality environments where there are multiple people present. And some social VR spaces use avatars to represent these people, avatars who don't look like the person or perhaps don't look like a person at all. But then there's also this push towards photorealism and perhaps a sort of implicit assumption that that's that the more we look like our real world selves, the better that is. And I guess all of these things have implications for self-identity and the performance of identity. So I guess I'm interested in what you think about what kind of narratives are enabled by spaces that use avatars, and then what's more likely or more comfortable in places where you have a more photorealistic representation.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to say. So I guess to start with, I would say to build on what Paul has been saying about kind of like understanding how we connect with our audiences, and it is really emotionally important how we kind of are represented in this new media, and like we actually feel that sense of presence and that sense of body ownership. And there's really sort of big questions about what's to come next. And I think particularly with photorealistic capture is often what practitioners are kind of moving towards as kind of what their like aims is, and I think and my research particularly explored two kinds of image captures: volumetric and 3D modeling scanning, and they're two different ways to capture avatars essentially, but they both have their own like stylistic visualities that can be used for all different purposes and fit with certain mediums more. But I think it's worth saying that like as 3D avatars become more commonplace in our culture through virtual fashion shows, social media influencers such as Baby Blue and Nunori, or VR platforms where musicians are starting to live stream their avatars that are rigged to kind of 3D digital doubles in virtual worlds. Avatars are kind of here to stay, and we're kind of entering a kind of new era where there really isn't any legislation, and there's kind of limited anthropological frameworks to understand what is to come next. And I think, so to bring things back around to your question about technology and narrative about the whole panel, I think my answer is people and our audiences and our collaborators, and how we work with our communities to ensure like safe passage and communication channels where people kind of understand to the best of their ability the types of data that is being captured. And I think that kind of plays into kind of the kind of stories that we're telling through new media. And I think particularly so my research was particularly focused on social VR spaces and how we connect with different immersants. And I received a few anecdotes where as the avatars become more photorealistic, a real identity and they kind of becomes you generally have like less harassment as there's more photorealistic avatars in live social VR spaces, particularly against women and certain vulnerable communities. And I think we have to really start to think about like the stories that we're telling in these spaces need to be kind of safeguarded, and particularly in regards to kind of like LGBTQ communities, where we have to think about the right to represent our self-identity in digital spaces and what that means for self-identity, and understanding the kind of crucial identity points in contemplating our self-identity and our immersence, and understanding kind of how our collaborators in social VR spaces must kind of strive. Like, why are they striving for photorealism? And I think the argument is that we should find freedom in having kind of alternative avatars, like such as like pink hippos and non-normative bodies that disrupt the kind of normalizing forces that work in our society. And I think we should kind of allow new ways of representing ourselves in social VR that kind of enhances our physical identities in a new way that allows us to fight back against these kind of patriarchal body ownership ideas from big tech and private corporations such as Facebook. So I think, to answer your question, what kind of narratives are enabled by spaces which use avatars? I think kind of understanding the kind of co-creational process of of our audiences, and understanding kind of how our audiences are going to relate to our spaces is really important to kind of enable the stories that will happen in these spaces.
Right, exactly. Because even when you're existing in social VR, you're still existing in our reality, which we know is unequal in all sorts of myriad ways. It's really, yeah, it's really interesting what carries over and how we can filter things, how we can how we can try to create worlds which are perhaps better in some way than the one that we're living in. And I guess that's kind of as I suppose before we move on, please do put questions. We would love to get input from folk at home, so please put your questions in the chat. But yeah, I guess when I was reading the research that you have all been doing, I was kind of struck by the fact that futures kind of links the work that you've all been doing in really different. The work is so different, but I think for all of you, there's this idea that art doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in dialogue with the past, and also as a way of thinking about the future. So Tanuja, in one of your blogs that you've written as part of the fellowship, you lament the lack of original stories in VR. And you're sort of commenting on this relationship between business models and what stories get told, that because there isn't a perceived audience for stories, they end up not getting commissioned. But then we end up in a sort of vicious circle. So the audience is X, so we make stories about X, so then the audience is still X. So I'm interested in how much you think the perceived audience for technology does determine the stories that get told, and then how can we break this vicious circle that we're in?
Big questions. Yeah, and of course that that conundrum is not just for VR. It's it's present in kind of all forms. Just look at most films are adaptations, most theatre commissions are adaptations, all of that kind of thing. And I can understand the sort of the safety in investing in a familiar product or a familiar property, but just like you say, the kind of the sort of the feedback loop of that, I think, is really dangerous. And as someone who is consistently kind of subject to other people's to the minoritizing from other people's sort of default perspectives, it frustrates me that so many of the stories about brown women fixate on kind of things like homemaking, or at worst things like honor killing, and not on this sort of the things that feel actually kind of closer to my life, that are about how we might imagine futures, or how I might go into space. And so what feels interesting about the opportunity with these newer forms, where there aren't kind of established business models yet, where it's not really necessarily clear who the kind of future audiences are going to be, and how we might make money from those things, is to kind of make a call on the opportunity of R&D in those areas to not just fixate on the kind of novelty of the technology or the kind of the really like immediate take up. I think, if you look at the way that people are kind of participating with VR at the moment, it's very niche, and an awful lot of that is either around social VR or around gamers, and so it'd be very easy to kind of look at the metrics from that kind of thing and think, oh, well, everything has to have interaction, everything has to be about this idea of kind of seeing through people's eyes, or all of those things, and actually we don't know anything. We're working with a really tiny pool of of audience data to research from, and I think the thing is to we're in a culture where the real target so often is this idea of how are we going to make money from this, how are we going to sell something, and it's much easier to sell familiar things. The idea of the transactional quality of making a promise and then building something to deliver that promise, is that to me feels incredibly corporate and capitalist. But there is this, as like Paul and Harry have been saying as well, this kind of like generative possibility in these spaces where we might be less familiar with the way that stories might touch us and move us and make us think. And maybe there are ways to kind of shift some of those parameters before we get sort of locked into those models. And what if we were to think a little bit harder? Is this an opportunity to think harder about actually what stories do we want to promote in those spaces? What kind of alternative sort of invitations do we want to make to people to kind of think about how to value or make use of these spaces to reflect on possibilities and kind of possibilities and alternatives, I suppose. So I think there's that. And just in terms of your question about like how do you break this cycle, I think one of the problems about the way that R&D often works in these areas is that there is a real like fetishization of the kind of demonstration of innovation in form. So it becomes about this sort of novelty. And of course, as artists as well and as creators, we don't yet know what's possible with these forms. So that kind of element of play is really important, and the idea of kind of working out what's possible is really important. But what we don't tend to critique in those spaces is the content, and is the kind of like, how do you make a great story here that's really going to connect with people? What does it mean to make original stories and ideas in these spaces, for these spaces that communicate through these different forms? And so I would argue for more investment, and I don't mean necessarily financial investment, but I mean kind of like critical investment in the idea of like, what is the content we're making and that we're promoting, and to kind of go beyond just the sort of the easy. And I don't mean that like there are, of course we need to like the kind of shining spotlight on important issues or kind of like underrepresented spaces is important to do, and that's an easy thing to value. But how do we do that? It's when it's like, can we go further than simply saying this is great because we're shining a light here? Can we go, it's great we're shining a light here, but how can we kind of extend the visibility of that in kind of different ways? So like, actually, how do we tell better stories, not just what stories can we tell?
Yeah, I really feel the lack of a critical community in this space, and of critique which goes beyond the kind of shiny tech, which I think we should be over by now. But yes, I'm interested in this idea of getting locked into models. And Harry, I would like to come to you to talk about what a DIY culture of VR could look like, because in your work you're super critical of big tech for its tech bro culture, for the power structures it represents, and its irresponsible behavior with data. But at the end of the day, Facebook own Oculus. So I guess, what do you think about how we go about constructing a DIY and potentially queer VR space, social space, when these are our tools?
I think it's interesting because the history of the technology behind VR is that I think it was kind of originally created by the military, and it's kind of like a weaponized piece of technology, you know, and it's really not very like LGBTQ friendly, and I think it's kind of about like claiming this technology and kind of actually like taking hold of it and inserting works that kind of sort of like change the trajectory of what this technology was intended for. So I think kind of like we need to really sort of in that way sort of start to contemplate our own approach and our own intentions behind a space or a piece of work, and why we're pulling it into this kind of militarized piece of hardware. And I think it's definitely, you know, I think the pandemic has really kind of brought a new a wider spectrum of XR audiences. And I think really to kind of, if we want to kind of erode sort of patriarchal and hegemonic powers that are currently placed inside our digital spaces, such as, you know, the data tracking nature of Zoom, that's how they make their money, or like the erosion of self-identity in social media. If we're intending to try and remove that, I think we have to start to ensure that the audiences that might have moved to these platforms in the pandemic kind of survive in the post-pandemic world. And I think just making sure that like we provide spaces for these communities to kind of create, you know, and to kind of connect, and to and the spaces might not be perfect at first, but I think by sort of empowering our audiences, there's kind of an opportunity there for what will become next. And I think yeah, it's interesting because, you know, Facebook are doing their own Facebook VR stuff, and they're inserting kind of boundaries, these kind of consent-based paradigms that kind of allow you to allow avatars to not come near you and stuff, and kind of setting these very physical architectures into their spaces, not just Facebook but other VR spaces too, to try and sort of encourage other immersants to engage with their space. And I think, yeah, we have to really start to question like who built these infrastructures, what's the architecture of the space built for, by what kind of data is being extracted by who and for what reason. And we have to try and sort of preserve this idea of our self-identity and being able to have control over our body ownership, how our bodies are represented, how our body data is tracked and mined, or whatever people are doing with this body data. And I think we must all take action and remain accountable for the interactions and identities explored in our digital worlds. And we have to kind of, as creators, have a kind of collective responsibility for the interactions and these spaces. But having a look, but exploring this through a sort of queer framework is interesting, because often the queer DIY scene, particularly in like the club night scene, is kind of really self-regulated, and there's no kind of like gatekeeping or like administration. And I think that's kind of yeah, I think there's a beautiful thing in an audience being in a space together with a certain intention, self-regulating a space.
Yeah, I think it's so important to be clear about how political this all is in the way that you just articulated. And Paul, coming to you, I've heard you speak about the act of exercising imagination as political. which I totally agree with the fact that it is. And particularly in relation to your piece, Millennium, in which audiences imagine these preferable or possible or plausible futures. And I kind of want to talk about the relationship between technology and narratives of false hope. So I think we kind of see this in relation to all sorts of things. I think, you know, in particularly in relation to climate change, there is this kind of idea of, you know, tech will come along and save us and we won't have to make any difficult decisions. And in Millennium, people are visioning places, and some of the things they imagine can't be built, won't be built. So how much are narratives of false hope a consideration within your work? And how do you manage that relationship with the audience?
Yeah, I think those are really interesting questions. It also makes me think, you know, thinking about some of the fabulous architectures makes me think a little bit about what Harry was talking about presenting kind of our internal sense of identity through kind of fabulous avatars that, you know, kind of queer or subvert the intended use, these kind of counter-realist representations that, that subvert the intended use of VR. And I was also thinking a bit about R&D really, and who gets involved in co-designing the platforms, who are the communities involved in that, and is there a way of involving our audiences and communities more in the iterative testing of them, as well as thinking about who gets represented or made visible by these new technologies. But yeah, with Future Places Toolkit, we want to inspire people to imagine better or preferable futures for their places. And it's really important that we keep asking better for whom. And our aim is to include people who often don't get included or wouldn't get involved in consultations about the future of their place. But you're really right about that issue of false hope. It's a really good point that we need to keep bearing in mind, especially in a way in the context of consultation, which is so often a performance of consultation and engagement when the redevelopment is a fait accompli. People are all too used to being consulted and that not leading to any significant change, a bit like Zoom fatigue. Consultation or engagement fatigue. It makes me think of Lauren Ballant, who talks about cruel optimism. And it's one of the things we talked through with Alex Mecklenburg of .Everyone, and also with our partners Stride Treglown and Null West Media Centre, when we were talking about responsible development, the importance of being really clear about the remit, what will happen to the ideas people propose, how will they be used, whether and how they'll feed into consultation or the development briefs. Being really clear, setting out the parameters for the activity. And you're right that some of the fantastical imaginations aren't going to be realized, but for us that's partly about getting people exercising their imagination, doing some social dreaming together, and through those themes emerge about real needs and wants for the community. And one of the things we try to work through is a pathway there, so to give people some concrete hope, I guess, to talk through what the next steps towards the changes that they want might be, and also the steps that might prevent some of the changes, for instance, around environmental catastrophe that we might not want to take to resist some of those more dystopian futures. So yeah, we're interested in doing some social dreaming together about people's places, and we're interested in who gets to do that. You know, we talk about equitable access to technologies, but it's also really important to think about how imagination is distributed, and, you know, not just equitable access to the technologies, but who gets the space and the privilege to imagine the future. The future isn't equitably distributed, just as technologies and tech literacy aren't equitably distributed. And one of the things we're drawing on, just to make the last point, is one of the things we're really interested in is Adrienne Marie Brown's idea that people need to write them, so people who've been excluded, marginalized communities need to write themselves into the future through the sci-fi stories they tell. And we hope Future Places Toolkit might enable people to tell some of those stories in which they see themselves, and to see themselves visualized in some of the futures for their plays.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry to start cutting you off, Paul, but we are out of time. Thank you so much to all of the panelists. I feel like it's a really nice place to end. How do we imagine these more equitable futures together, and what role does narrative play and what role does technology play? So yes, thank you so much for joining us. Please do check out everybody's work on the expo stage, and please do stay with us for the rest of the day, because we've got so many more interesting projects and people who you can learn about. Thank you.